Tonight we're meeting virtually. Okay, welcome. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, I thank you. We have many people that have been with us in many of our programs. I see some faces that I haven't seen for a while. That's always great. We love to see your faces if you'll share them on the screen. We always look forward to making new friends and greeting our old ones. Thank you for all being with us for another Let's Talk About Race program. It's amazing. We're in our 8th year of doing this program. Conversation is an entry point to move us into deeper understanding of one another. Our goal is to continue these conversations with the hope of deeper understanding and empathy that leads to a commitment to changing thoughts and behaviors. The good thing about living in 2023 is we're having these conversations. I also think we try very hard not to get political, but before we had President Trump as our president, I would often hear how there weren't any racial problems anymore because young people weren't prejudiced. And this always really made me angry, quite honestly, because there are many parents out there that are very prejudiced and they're raising children to be prejudiced. And also those of us that think that we're very enlightened, we have a lot more to learn. So we really, really appreciate you educating yourself and being with us. We've always had incredibly respectful conversations. And by the way, I'm Linda Hewitt. I'm from the Red Bank Library. I meant to tell you that in the very beginning. The library is open for many programs now, but we still are having many of our programs virtually. I used to talk about all our programs, but that takes an awful lot of time because we really do have an incredible array of programming. So I encourage you to go onto our website and look at the different programs we have for children, for adults, for young adults. We run the gamut. If there's ever an adult program that you wish that we would have, don't hesitate to contact us. You can contact me directly if you'd like. I really appreciate hearing from people on what they'd like to have. Sometimes our conversations can be uncomfortable. That's not a bad thing. I mean, sometimes it's good that we feel uncomfortable. We have to acknowledge that racism exists. It exists not only in this country, but all across the world. And our conversations help, hopefully, to change that. Also, I just want you to know that we have an ongoing food drive at the library. We have seen homelessness greatly increase in Red Bank throughout the country, but certainly in Red Bank. So we collect food all the time. You can bring what you want and take what you need, and whatever's left over we donate to Red Bank. We also do coat drives, all different types of drives. Again, if you have any suggestions, don't hesitate to let us know. Tomorrow night, the library is having a program on affordable housing, which is a really big problem, not just in New Jersey and Monmouth County, but throughout the entire country. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton over to my dear friend, Patty White, who will talk to you. By now, we all know how to play well on Zoom, I think, but she's going to review just a few things. And then after that, Claire Lomack Phelps will moderate tonight's conversation. Claire also works at the library, so welcome, sit back, and have a great night. Patty?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Yeah, just a couple of quick Zoom reminders. If you're not speaking, it's very helpful to keep your device on mute if possible, because there might be extraneous sound from your end, and sometimes there's feedback when other people are talking. And secondly, as Linda mentioned, we certainly like seeing your face, so it's fine to show your video if you like. Claire is going to introduce the program and the speakers, and a reminder when it's time for the audience participation. If you can either raise your hand or put your name in the chat that you have a comment or question. That way we can try to keep people in order so that everyone gets a turn. And Claire Phelps, please carry on.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Patty. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being with us this evening. Our theme tonight is being bold in divisive times. We have our panelists, and all of us together will be sharing stories about confronting racial divisiveness, being bold, and how we confront and tackle these issues. And we have three wonderful presenters tonight. The first presenter I will introduce you to is Reverend Dianne Watson-Kendall. Okay, she serves as a ministerial associate at Pilgrim Baptist Church in Red Bank, where the pastor there is Reverend Terrence K. Porter. She was ordained in the Baptist denomination by Pastor Porter in September of 2018. Reverend Dianne previously served as the interim pastor of the Latino Community Church at Pilgrim. She served as the minister of the women's ministry for 7.5 years there at Pilgrim. She's licensed in ministry in 2004 by the Reverend Dr. Henry P. Davis Jr. She was born and raised in New York City and has resided in Middletown, New Jersey for 31 years. She's got 2 adult children, a son and a daughter. She graduated with honors from the New Brunswick Theological Seminary, attaining a Master of Divinity degree in 2006. She's been also a practicing professional nurse for over 3.5 decades and is board certified in psychiatry and mental health by the American Nurses Credentialing Center. She believes that the blending of her identity as a nurse and a minister are consistently reflected in her response to her calling. Reverend Dianne is a board trustee for the Monmouth Center for World Religions and Ethical Thought. And her ministerial focus encompasses her scientific and scholarly knowledge while championing social justice issues. Thank you and welcome, Reverend Dianne. Our second speaker tonight will be Ellen Terry. Okay, and Ellen is a local Quaker in Shrewsbury, New Jersey here. She's also a master gardener and lives in Millstone. And she's a member of the Monmouth County Historic Commission and the Millstone Township Shade Tree Commission. Welcome, Ellen Terry. And our third speaker tonight will be Kay Harris. And Kay Harris has deep roots in Asbury Park. She is the president of the Asbury Park Historical Society, founder and president of the Asbury Park Museum. She's a graduate of Uppsala College and Clark Atlanta University. After 17 years of a career in management with AT&T, she opened and is the owner of the Asbury Galleria, which is located on the Asbury Park Boardwalk. She's worked with the Asbury Park School District. She continues to mentor youth, and she brings a wealth of knowledge tonight. And we're very happy to have everyone here tonight. Thank you all for being with us. Warm welcome. And now what I will do is turn over our program to Reverend Dianne Watson-Kendall, who will begin the program with us. Thank you, Reverend Dianne.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you. Hi, greetings to everybody. Greetings and salutations, and grace and peace be unto you all. I was listening to that extensive bio and I was like, I need to edit it. We need to, that's all, it's not all necessary. But thank God for the opportunity to share with you all this evening. And I've had the pleasure of, attending some of the Race Matters talks during the summertime when my church does not have Bible study, because Wednesday nights are pretty booked up for me generally. But I'm so glad to be able to participate this evening. and the topic being speaking and being bold in these diverse times. And certainly as an African-American woman and an African-American clergy woman, everybody pretty much, I don't think that you'll get too much denial from the average person, as Linda had said in her introduction, acknowledging that indeed racism is a reality, certainly not only in this country, but globally. And within that racism, we find all kinds of environmental racism. We find all kinds of limitations placed upon people in terms of their own aspirations. We see all kinds of limitations that are so ingrained, and they've actually now labeled a lot of these things as an unconscious bias, and a lot of things that, you know, people may not be aware of because they're culturally imposed. And so certainly as Black people, we know we have a long history of subjugation here in America, in the Caribbean, and, you know, wherever the diaspora is encompassed. So for me to speak about being bold in diverse times, I have been bold all my life and been bold in speaking to social justice issues. And pretty much it started for me from childhood, because I'm a child of the civil rights era. I was in the 9th grade on April 4th, 1968, when Dr. King was assassinated. And I vividly remember the day and everything that transpired. When you talk about speaking boldly, my position is that, as I told Linda and Patty and Claire, that my situation is that essentially when I'm speaking, I'm preaching to the choir. When I'm speaking, when I'm preaching, or whether it's a sermonette or a sermon or doing any kind of teaching, you know, the audience, because as everybody probably realizes that within the faith communities, that even though you may work with your colleagues and peers and have different interface with people in a scholarly situation in the schools, but that Sundays most often is a segregated situation. So we have, as African Americans, have a long history with the African American Episcopalian Church, the AME Zion Church, Baptist churches. And although we have certainly the Baptist Protestant denomination, you know, the churches largely up until now, it's a segregated time. So when I preach, I am preaching to people who readily know what God of our weary years, God of our silent tears mean. When I'm preaching to people know that it's a struggle and continues to be a struggle. And they know that unfortunately, Eric Garner and George Floyd, Breonna Taylor are not abnormalities. They noted, unfortunately for us as a people, since the emancipation of people, that as a people, we have been not kindly treated. Whereas when we were chattel and property, examples were made out of us at times, but it would be like taking your car and deliberately driving it into a wall, because when you serve a purpose and you don't want to really do too much damage to your property. But once we were no longer property, then it became open season to do all kinds of things. So when I'm speaking to people, we have a shared history most of the time. Now, when I was in seminary, we had something called pulpit pooling, whereas churches that I went to a seminary that's called Reformed Church of America, which is by and large a white denomination. and by and large, Dutch ancestry. So they would sometimes need a speaker to go and preach. And so I preached in white churches, but generally, you know, I'm preaching about faith tenets. I'm preaching about our belief system in Christ. So there was never any kind of need for pushback. But fortunately, I was able to do an extensive interview with my pastor that Claire named Pastor Reverend Terrence K. Porter, who is very widely known in the Red Bank community, and he is the police chaplain for the chiefs of police for all of Monmouth County. So he's the chaplain for the chiefs of police throughout Monmouth County. I am also a chaplain, and many of the other clergy in our church are chaplains for law enforcement. And so I spoke to him, and he was saying that he has had different challenges through the years, particularly dealing with law enforcement officers, because very much, as we all know, through the development of Black Lives Matter and all kinds of organized protests, most particularly after George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin. And we've had situations whereby people were eating ice cream and officers just come into their house by mistake because they're intoxicated and kill people. We've had all kinds of events in the last few years that have been challenging. And as global citizens, it's challenging to everyone. It's not just challenging to a single group of people. So my pastor said that, you know, through the years, there has been tension, and that sometimes it becomes difficult to navigate through the tension with European descendant people, because sometimes there is a very definitive defense mechanism at play, and a denial and justification for acts and deeds. And this has been something that we all are familiar with and know. He said explicitly that he had a definite tension about the discussion of Colin Kaepernick, the football player who decided to take a knee when the anthem, the Star Spangled Banner, was playing. And that became, as we all know, a huge kind of controversy throughout the NFL and throughout society. And there was a very huge response on both sides of the issue. And somehow or the other, he taking a knee because he wanted to draw attention to what was going on in the African-American community in terms of brutality. Many people interpreted that as unpatriotic, and particularly law enforcement and military viewed that in that way. So Pastor Porter said that, you know, he was, you know, it was a positive thing for him to be in those rooms. Very often, Black people know that in the rooms where these discussions are occurring and where people are saying different things that may definitively have some kind of response in our community, or if something is being said about our community, or are things that are not true, or things that are definitely may be viewed by more than one perspective. Very oftentimes we are not in those rooms where these discussions are being held. So he, being the police chaplain of all the chiefs of police, he is very often in these rooms, and he's able to put forth the view or another perspective that they may not have considered. And so he said that it's been helpful for him. And we all know the Eatontown, the Mingo Jack situation, where the Black man was lynched in Monmouth County. And he, again, we had a discussion about how the New Jersey Social Justice Coalition was able to navigate and get that done this past spring. And you know, that there's positivity. What we did discuss, which was very concerning, is the fact that unfortunately the word Christian seemingly now has been, you know, I have to just use the word hijacked by what's called the evangelical Christian movement, that a lot of racist people have, and when you look at what they're saying and what they're preaching, they're not necessarily preaching the tenets of Christ or biblical knowledge at all. They're saying all kinds of things that are limiting to large swaths of people and calling it Christianity. And so Pastor and I were discussing it and discussing the fact that as Black clergy, it's not optional for us. We and many of you know, Pilgrim is a church that, you know, certainly preaches our faith, but we stand on social justice. We stand on social justice, and we do everything that we can to get those kinds of things in the forefront. But he and I discussed that the church really should not be the one that has it. We know historically with Dr. King and Southern Christian leadership, you know, SCLC, and that throughout the years, the church has indeed, in fact, been the ones on the forefront of pushing these ideals. But as Pastor and I were discussing, it should be organizations like Congress of Racial Equality, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Urban League. These are the organizations that should be pushing for these types of things, and not, you know, not wanting to criticize these organizations, but there ought to be more than just dues and banquets and things like that. We need to make sure that these organizations are supported and that people are busy and active and diligent about doing these kinds of things, because unfortunately, we see time and time again. I was just watching the news tonight, and a young man was killed in Memphis by African-American police. What we have to understand is that it's not really necessarily a color situation. It's a culture. It's a culture that perceives people to be subjugated. It's a culture that the word officer came from overseer. And this is a culture that believes that people are less than. So we see instances of improvement amongst the culture. We see, depending on the administration at the top of various systems, we see some changes, and it's for the good. But of course, when things are exposed, as long as things are hid and people are in denial and people are justifying things that should not be justified, healing cannot take place. Healing has to be in South Africa. I had the pleasure of going to Cape Town, South Africa. Oh my goodness, it must have been at least about 15, 16 years ago. And you know, they had something called Truth and Reconciliation. And but the covering of the truth, or the misrepresentation of the truth, or having history books that say that slavery was an idyllic time in America, and that the slaves really loved to be slaves. There was no resentment of it, that's what that was their lot, and they loved it, and everybody knew who their place was. The masters knew their place and the slaves knew theirs, and there was no tension or struggle in that. those kinds of misrepresentations. It's not in Germany, you will definitely not see any statues of Hitler or Mengele or any of these Nazi terrorists. Whereas in America, you know, you see statues to all the Confederate soldiers and Jefferson Davis and things like that. And these are the kinds of iconography that lead to misrepresentations and a retelling of the real original narrative. So those are the kinds of things that I would just say, as a Black woman and as a Christian clergy person, I believe in truth. The Bible says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So I am certainly in favor of that, and I believe in truth. I do believe in truth, justice, and the American way, as Superman used to say when I was a kid. Truth, justice, and the American way. But what we have to make sure is that the hijacking of the American way is not what we saw on January 6th. When we say that we want to have police members are important to us, what about the Capitol policemen? What about the gentleman that was killed from New Jersey? They were law enforcement officers, and crime occurred. And as Linda said, this is not a political time, but why should the person who stood up there and said, we're gonna go down there and I'm gonna go there with you and we're gonna take that Capitol, why was there even a committee to discuss it when we already saw it?
Yes,
When
yes.
we all saw it with our own eyes. And why should he now be allowed back on Facebook and Instagram? So these are the kinds of questions that we see about us. And if there is no moral code, there's no bottom, there's no ethnic, there's no moral, there's no bar at all, no matter how low it goes. Not to mention, I'm in Queens, where I am from, born in Queens. This is where I am at my sister's house, and it's only a few blocks away from George Santos' district. And so I'm telling you, there's no line that's too low. So we have to just wake up. When I was a kid, there was a song called Wake Up Everybody.
I'm sorry,
No
Reverend Dianne.
You stop me anytime.
Okay,
Claire,
thank you so much. Right, we do need to move on. And I appreciate everything that you've said. It's all true. It's wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for your insight.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
I'll mute
and we'll come back to the chat. Okay. Well, thank you so much. We will now move on to Ellen Terry, who will, give us some insight on some of her experience. Thank you, Ellen. You may go on.
Thank you, Claire.
You're welcome.
Dianne, it's really hard to follow a dynamo like you.
It is.
Because you just said everything. Well, this is my first time with the panel. I did not know you existed for 8 years. I live way out in Millstone. I'm the other end of the universe. But I was invited by Patty, who got my name from someone in the historic community who knows that I worship as a Quaker. We call ourselves the Religious Society of Friends. We call ourselves Friends. We're known as Quakers. And as I explained, our only belief is that all people are equal in the face of the Creator. We have no other list of things that we believe, so it's not possible for one person to speak for everyone. We each are equal. We speak for one another. But I can tell you a little bit about Quakers and history and the abolition of slavery and how we got there. Because the fact of the matter is, when the earliest Quakers came over here in the middle of the 17th century, many of them enslaved other human beings. That is a fact. How did we come to abolitionists? And why, with our reputation for being the strong abolitionists, are there mostly white Quakers, very few members of color? What's going on there? Well, of course, back in Western Europe, most land was owned by people who were born into the so-called nobility. When people came here, look at all the open space. Of course, forget the fact there were already people here and it was their land. It was, you know, I don't know how else to say it, but taken by the people who came here. There was a lot of land. How do you work on this land? Pre-industrial revolution. No gas-powered engines, no combines, no John Deere tractors. The way they did it was by enslaving other human beings. Okay, now slavery goes back before written history. You know, there was slavery in the Bible. But this was specific enslavement of Black African people. Okay? Why racism? It justifies enslaving people. These white guys in boats pull up to Africa and see the people do not live in stuccoed homes with slate roofs. Well, guess what? It doesn't snow in Africa, but they take it upon themselves to assume that these people don't know what they're doing. Okay? They justify enslaving people by saying to themselves, oh, these people are only fit for working as laborers. This is obviously not true. All right, so we come here to this country. The Quakers worship on Sundays. They started as Christians, okay? But they don't have any sort of leadership positions, everybody being equal. So Quakers have what they call meetings. Okay, they call them monthly meetings or half yearly or yearly. That refers to the business meeting. Somebody's got to keep the roof from caving in. Somebody's got to keep the electric turned on. Somebody's got to mow the grass. So we have business meetings once a month. That's not the only business. We also speak about social issues. And so, although there were Quakers who enslaved humans, they got to realizing what an evil, evil thing that was. And absolutely in opposition to the belief that all humans are equal. Of course, they had to go through what we call Quaker process, which is the business meeting where we go round and round and everybody has a chance to speak and so on and so forth. But sooner or later, every single business monthly meeting came to say slavery is wrong. And the organizations that got together, like here in Monmouth County, we have Shrewsbury and Manasquan, and we also have New Brunswick and Plainfield. That's our half yearly meeting, and we're under the care of the New York yearly meeting. Little by little, all the different meetings came to agree that slavery is wrong. Unfortunately, not everyone lived their belief. And I think that is why you do not see a lot of people of color in our Quaker meetings. I just read a book, The Color of Abolition, about Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison, who was a great abolitionist. He did not want anybody to buy Frederick Douglass's freedom because he would be more authentic as a slave. What? Excuse me. How would anyone expect another human being to remain enslaved? You could be snatched off the streets and sent right back into slavery. Okay? So what people learned was wrong. You didn't really internalize it. And that is what we need to do. We need to internalize our understanding of genuine equality, or as Frederick Douglass insisted, no, it's not enough to give him his freedom. He demanded recognition of full humanity. I think he's one of the greatest people who ever lived. I think he spoke for everyone when he demanded recognition of full humanity. And until we have that, we're going to have problems with racism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Such passion, and it just really brings the point forth for us all. Thank you so much. And now we will have Kay Harris speak. Kay, the floor is yours.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I think I'll just talk about maybe reflection on some of my experiences or perception. And as Dianne, I believe, had mentioned, oftentimes we are speaking with the choir, to the choir. I can remember attending one of the city council meetings in Asbury Park, and there was some conversation about some controversial issues and a proclamation to recognize the differences. And there were some racial discussions. And then a woman stood up, because some of you may be aware, Asbury Park really at one point was two different cities. The west side of Asbury Park was from the railroad tracks westward. And that was annexed about 25 years after the founding of Asbury Park. Actually 35 years, excuse me. So in 1906, it became a part of Asbury Park. So the west side is where the laboring class was, but it wasn't just African Americans. It was Italians, it was the Jewish, Hungarians, it was Southern Europeans, a lot of immigrants coming here for work and a better life. So we did have a mixture, a cross-section of ethnicities on the west side. Danny DeVito's father owned a store on Springwood Avenue. So one of the women had said, well, I don't know what everybody's complaining about, because we used to all get along. We lived near, with each other. There wasn't any problems or tension. But yet she overlooked the fact that on the west side, Bangs Avenue School was two separate schools, Bangs Avenue North and Bangs Avenue South. The North for the whites, the South for the blacks. We had two other elementary schools in Asbury Park, but they were in the predominantly, white areas. But in this particular area where there was a mixture of blacks and white, you think they're sending their kids together to school together? So 1946 is when they finally desegregated the schools and they connected it with the tunnel. But in doing so, as soon as that happened, that's when the family started. In fact, first they said, well, I'll tell you what, if you're going to do that, why don't you put all the girls on one side and the boys on the other? Because of course they didn't want that intermingling, and that didn't go down. So eventually it was desegregated. And then soon after, the family started pulling their children out of Bangs Avenue School. They would send them to Mark Carmel's school, which was also on Bangs Avenue, a block down the street. And I believe if they had multiple children, they would probably pull their daughters out first. So if you look at, and then the sons, but when you look at some of the class pictures of Bangs Avenue School, you could see how it gradually changed. At one point, 1946, when they integrated, you'd see black and whites, but each year the numbers of whites dwindled to the point it's all black. So a lot of times I think we're hypocritical. We would like to say how long, well, we get along together. And then, of course, everybody knows New Jersey was the last to vote on emancipation of all the states at that time. And even though we might have been anti-slavery, we didn't really like socializing together. And let's see, when I was born in 52. So when I was in high school, in grammar school at Bangs Avenue, I remember 8th grade, it's time to go to high school. We had about six different 6th grade classes. And at that time, they would kind of group you by level. So the guidance counselors come over to the school to sign us up for high school. And at that time, you had a college prep curriculum, a business curriculum, and a general curriculum. And they came to our class. Now, out of 6 classes, if we're just supposedly the top out of the 6, surely everybody, and matter of fact, not just our class, all 6 classes should have been encouraged. All 6 classes should have been encouraged to sign up. But they were really encouraging us. You know what? You really should start off with the business curriculum and then see how you do. Then later on, if you're doing okay, then maybe we could bump you up to college prep. Now, for college prep, a lot of times there's certain courses you need a certain number of classes, 4 years of this, 2 years of that, 3 years. So if you're starting off with the business curriculum and then decide to change, you may already be behind the 8 ball. And I think they even kind of gave the excuse they didn't have enough forms for everybody to take the college, to sign up for college prep. So I go home and I have this conversation with my parents. And the next thing I know, my father reached out to his fellow men's club members. And they consisted of, maybe Dr. Hayes and Dr. Carter, William Knuckles. We had a cross section of professionals, and we all met in the auditorium, and it was a big program with the men sitting on stage having conversations with the 8th grade class and talking about the different careers they're in and importance for education and the importance of reach for the stars. Then if you miss it, at least you'll land on the moon. And I know that's a well-worn phrase, but it's still one that stuck with me. And I think that's what we need. And of course, at that time, Asbury Park, we were a village, so to speak. We had a lot of Blacks, but it was a cross section of all kinds of professionals and mentors, and we looked out for each other, and we were very active and involved. And so I'm so glad that we had these, people, and even within the families, not every family had a parent maybe with the same level of education, but it didn't matter because we were all concerned about everybody's family, not just our own. I knew that the 4 of us, me and my brothers and sisters, we just understood you going to college, but not everybody had those type of role models. So this is the kind of things that we kind of had to fight against. And then also, even in current days, when we talk about gentrification in Asbury Park and how everything is changing, and yes, we're glad that it's starting to, come to life again, but we're concerned about the direction in which it does. About a year or so ago, there was a big controversial because iStar wanted to put a pool in the north end, about 7th Avenue on the boardwalk. And one thing when you get involved in folks, and I appreciate that it's not always like, there are white people who are also standing up and they want to make sure Blacks are included. and they come across as if they're really for us and fighting for us. So then they'll reach out to someone like me, Kay, we want you to be one of our spokesperson, or Felicia, you know, they kind of grab the folks. But I also like to look at a whole picture before I jump into it and everything. At that time, we also have condominiums that happen to be on the beach. Now, years ago, back in the 40s and 50s, we did have pools on the beach front. We had we had the Monte Carlo pool, the 7th Avenue pool, the 2nd Avenue pool. And I don't know if it's a NIMBY issue, but that pool just happened to be across the street from where some folks live. So of course they were fighting against the pool. Now, in my case, I was fighting against it, but for a different reason. I really didn't have a problem with the pool being there, but this pool was being promoted as a members pool, a membership pool. That makes all the difference in the world. You know, so there is that gentrification and oh, don't worry, when we build this pool, there'll be another one on 2nd Avenue where everybody goes to. Now, I don't have a problem if they want a members pool, but if they want a membership pool, put it in the middle of town or have it a part of your hotel. But I believe public space, and the beachfront is public space. Nobody owns it. I mean, we do have private developers own the convention hall and the pavilions, but Asbury Park owns the boardwalk, they own the beach. And as far as I was concerned, public places should be available to all of us. So sometimes I have it like a nuance into why I'm against something, and I want to make that distinction. And I think all of us kind of need to be careful as that. So those are the things I wanted to share. There were also some things I could have shared about my grandfather. He used to do illustrations for the Crises magazine, but since we only had 10 minutes, you know, I could maybe say that for another time. And it was just examples. This was he was also a social kind of activist person. Aside from the fact that he did the sand sculptures, he was actually one of the founders of the Neptune Asbury Park NAACP. And he did illustrations for the Crises magazine. And a lot of the illustrations he did was another form of protesting the indignations and the lynching and etc. So it's up to you. It's like 10 minutes to 8. And
Well, maybe we can come back to that, Kay, if anybody has any questions, because that story is so wonderful about your grandfather, and it's you know, so rich with your family history and the history of Asbury Park. So at this point now, I would like to open the floor. If anyone has any questions, you can either raise your hand or put them in the chat. If not, we have a few questions here to prompt discussion. If anybody would like to begin, otherwise I can pose some questions. You can put your name in the chat if you'd like to speak or raise your hand. Yes, Mr. Al James has his hand up.
I just wanted to say, I guess listening to everybody talk, there's a couple of things I think maybe need to be aware of. I know we were talking about boldness in the time of divisiveness. And one of the statements that was made early on was that, you know, there's racism here and there's racism all over the world. Well, racism, like something else like guns, I guess is built into the fabric of America. And Ms. Terry talked about, you know, internalizing, she said we need to internalize the fact that everybody is equal. But what has been internalized going way back is that everybody's not equal. And that's the thing that needs to be overcome. Mm-hmm. The internalization that everybody's not equal, you know, resulted in not just racism, but institutionalized racism. It's not that I just don't think you're as good and so on as but I am going to put up all kinds of barriers to show, in other words, almost to prove. I'm going to keep you from getting, decent housing, decent education, and so on, by actually building those things into code, into the law, in such a way that it will, keep you back. So there's such a long history of that kind of institutionalized racism that, trying to get everybody just to say, oh, let's change that. That's not going to happen. You can see already that it's taken generations, many generations, and it's still here. And so it's not going to change that way. As an African-American man, it's better said as a Black man traveling around the world, I don't get the same treatment in other countries. I've been to Sweden and Norway and Amsterdam. I don't get the same treatment and the same feeling as here in the United States. Because here in the United States, and somebody mentioned a club before, if you go into a club, like a country club, you can feel, as Sid Bernstein said, you can feel all that pent up emotion or hatred and so on. You don't get that feeling in those countries at all. You can go into the fanciest restaurants, and I mean, I've been to Berlin, I've been to Paris, and as I said, in Sweden and Norway and Denmark and so on. You just don't get that same kind of feeling. So it's a different story here, and I think what we need to concentrate on here is trying to eliminate as much as possible the institutionalized racism, because as Dianne, will attest, I mean, we find people, I've made a decent life and a decent living in spite of all the things that have happened. I've been able to get educated and had good jobs and put my kids through college and so on, even though those things were in the way. So, just think of what it would be if they weren't in the way, in that way, and now there is, more the opportunity, that than existed in the past. So I think if we can, work on institutionalized, eliminating that, we'd be better. And just one last thing, I was speaking about guns and boldness in the face of divisiveness now. I mean, to talk against guns, gets people into a lot of trouble even, to talk against guns. And a statistic was mentioned today that there's been 39 mass shootings in the first 3 weeks of this year, which means 13 every week, which is almost 2 every day. That's not going to change either without some bold action. And that's not existing in other countries either. So.
Right. Well, thank you, Mr. James. Thank you so much. We have 2 questions. One is actually directed to Mr. James, but Eileen Tyson had a question for the audience. She would like to ask audience as well as the speakers to give examples of times that they have been bold with people who are not in your own sphere, those who are not already the converted, so to speak. And then the question for Mr. James is, why do you think that is? Why do you think that the racism, is not as bad overseas? Darlene Tyler said she's heard that many times that people are not as racist as they are here in the United States. And I've also heard that as well, and kind of experienced some of that as well, but it's a big question. So with those 2 questions, if anybody would like to speak to those.
I can speak to the one that was directed to me. And,
okay.
Because nobody's born a racist. Nobody's born racist. But here you taught it from the cradle up. Over there, you're not taught it from the cradle up. You know, you'll notice that, you know, there are African-American entertainers who go overseas and they are, you know,
Josephine Baker.
Right.
huge
Davis Jr.
stars. Right after the war, a lot of Black entertainers went to Germany, even, you know, went to England, where you know, the Beatles caught on to. They went over there and they were, you know, totally accepted, and you know, people didn't stay away from them. I mean, people loved the kind of music they brought and so on, and they were very popular in almost all the countries over there because they didn't have that built-in racism. The story I have when I came to New Jersey, which is, you know, 50, probably going on 60 years ago, when I came to New Jersey and I had a difficult time as an African-American buying a home. When I finally did get into a home, the neighbors' kids, I think there were 3 of them. And, you know, and I had kids, and the neighbors' kids were in my house the first day. As soon as they saw kids, that's all they wanted. You know, kids just love to see kids, and that's all they wanted. They were not racist. They, you know, at that point, they had not been, you know, taught that. And kids don't. Everybody's seen that. Kids don't, you know, make that distinction. You know, they go and play with kids. And until they're taught it and they're told that, oh no, you can't do that, you shouldn't associate with that, and so on. And then they start to internalize what they are being taught. But up until that point, and that's why in the other countries, they're not taught that from in the same way. And therefore, I can assure you it does not exist the same, even in Canada. Even if you go to Canada, it feels different than it does.
You know, I think the root of it comes back to during the time of slavery. Once they were free, you have emancipation. There was a class of Caucasians who maybe they always felt like somebody had to be underneath them, so to speak. You know, like if you're already comfortable and you have money, maybe you were fine with the Blacks being free. But I think there was resentment when there are many Blacks started to excel and do well. They were acquiring property. They had businesses, and then they were obtaining positions in Congress. So I think there was resentment because how could these people who were used to be slaves be jumping ahead of us? I think that probably has part of the resentment. So that's when, we got to change that. And that's when, of course, all of the you know, all the laws started, Reconstruction happened to reverse that. And then I think it just kind of spreads, and as you say, from generation to generation, and maybe the subsequent generations didn't have the same reason, but it just becomes ingrained in them. And of course, in the later part of the centuries, when the KKK came around, it wasn't anything that was frowned upon. It was like being a part of the lodge and, you know, like normal.
Right. It wasn't stopped. It wasn't discouraged. It was encouraged to a degree. We have another.
I would like to say Kay is so correct.
Yes.
That white people didn't like seeing the people they had enslaved getting ahead of them. It really made them angry. And I once said to a white friend of mine, I thought she was going to kill me. I believe that if I could construct a mammoth spreadsheet from the moment the first Europeans came here, I could prove that the wealth of this country was created by Black people. I'm sure I could prove it. She said, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You're an idiot. You're so wrong. No, I don't think so. And I think that that's behind the little minds of a lot of white people. We owe all the people who were enslaved. How else were those landowners. How else were they able to make their wealth? Okay, so they had all these enslaved Black people. They were growing cotton, but excuse me, it wasn't just the cotton. It was all the people up in Massachusetts who would turn that cotton into fabric. And then all the people who made clothing. And what about all the people shipping the stuff over to Europe and shipping manufactured goods back, and all the insurance? And you could put your enslaved person up as against a loan, just like, you know, you have to have something behind anything that you get a loan for now. I don't think white people can stand that fact, but I'm sure it's true. I am absolutely certain it is true. There's tremendous amount of wealth in this country, and it's all up at the top, and it's mostly in the hands of white people. That's why, and they justify. Why is there racism? Not what is racism. Why is there racism? It's a justification. It's a justification of why I'm allowed to have more than you have. That's what it is.
That's a very good point. Thank you so much, Ellen. Just want to get back to someone who had a comment about the rise of neo-fascist political groups in Europe. Many European countries, okay, that's another issue that is coming up. Brexit, which was directed at the immigrant populations. And this is from Sue Goldberg, and she thinks that the problem of racism today is growing around the world. So, you know, to speak to some of that, you know, we've seen that as well. So if anybody has any comment about that.
Claire, I would like to speak to that actually.
Okay, Linda.
And Patty also has her hand up, but
Okay.
we're talking black white issues tonight, but racism is not just against black and white. You know, it is not just a black and white issue. When I've traveled in France, I've seen Muslims targeted. When I've traveled in England, I've seen Indians targeted. In the Middle East, I was in a country in Oman, which was a very friendly country, but it was just fine for people from India to work on the roads, to actually live on the roads and get $1 a day. They weren't considered human because they were from India. So my son lived in South America, one of my sons, for 4 years. And in Colombia, the darker your skin, he said, the more you were considered to be less of a human being. I mean, it is oftentimes in many countries, they find one group of people that they'll target. I also find that with immigration now becoming more and more of a problem, there's more prejudice. So as bad as it is in our country, and the fact that somebody like Lena Horne or Josephine Baker could go to France and be accepted and not accepted here, there were other nationalities, other cultures that were frowned upon that I've seen. Patty?
That's true. Patty. Patty's got her hand up. Yes.
Thank you. Actually, before we close tonight, I want to share an upcoming program from Brookdale College that Angie Cariotis sent me information. There's Solidarity series.
Yeah.
So maybe, 5 minutes before we close, Claire, I would like to share that screen with everybody.
Okay.
But to the topic, Ellen raised an interesting point when she mentioned bringing up the sensitive topic of, where did our wealth come from, and enraging the person she was speaking to. And I know that I've had similar conversations. I can't remember. I think it was Reverend Dianne maybe was talking about how when you're in a room with, if there's at least one person of African descent in a room of white people, those white people are going to watch what they say. When it's all white people, there are lots of folks who feel free to just, they think they're going to make an assumption that you hold the same bigotry that they do. And so it becomes a real challenge for us, for white people, to have a backbone and speak up, knowing that you may enrage the person in the room. But I wanted to share with you a story. And some of you have heard this story about a young man named Derek Black, who was raised in the white supremacy movement in this country. His stepfather, at one point, his mother was married to David Duke, the Grand Wizard at one time of the Ku Klux Klan. Derek effectively was welcomed and loved out of his bigotry. And he said that most of the time, when the white supremacists are trying to recruit people for their cause, it only takes one dissenting voice to kind of put them on notice and, you know, have them tone it down. I understand that doesn't happen all the time because there's a lot of free-flowing anger in the world these days. But I just think that's an important point to remember. What are we willing to do and to sacrifice for our fellow man, for our fellow human beings? I feel like that's what we're talking about tonight. Thank you.
Yes, very good. Thank you, Patty. That was a wonderful point. Joseph Rataco?
Yeah, I like to pick up on a hopeful aspect of what Patty said. And I think it's been said before that maybe, I don't know what percent, but a small percent of people are racist and trying to propagate it. I would say half the country, maybe more, is basically silent. And that's the crowd we gotta motivate, because when a racist says something and everybody else is quiet, they think they have more support. So the standing up for the other, which is important that we each do it. If you do it in your own community carefully, you don't necessarily have to enrage. You just make people aware that I don't agree with that, that offends me. So if you do it in a non-threatening way, it can be helpful. Now I'd like to turn to what do we do? And I'll share my situation looking for ideas. I'm now a member of a Presbyterian congregation in Mattawan. It's had Blacks in it for 50 years, maybe more. We typically have about 10% Black, which is actually better than many situations. But every time we try to move on and recognize the congregation is, as mainline churches are doing, they're shrinking. And they're all in danger of, like, in 5 years or 10 years, we're not going to be here anymore because we don't have enough congregants. So when you try to raise social justice issues, sometimes we have too many problems already. That's one factor. Second thing is that's divisive, and then we're going to lose people. And therefore and I now have a pastor who's been here for 2 years who's willing to join me on trying to do something. So we're trying to kind of open up the door through like mini education to start teaching people some of the facts that kind of we all know, but a lot of other people are like either clueless or in denial. And again, we're not going to turn around the racists. We're going to try to appeal to the other folks who hopefully we'll end up saying, I didn't realize that. I mean, if you get people to move to that point, something may happen. So we're kind of at the beginning of that journey. We've had like a few events, a few Black speakers, and so far so good. But if other people have ideas for particular people who would be particularly good at showing up at my church or other churches and say, we hear that you're interested in hearing our stories, you know, that's an idea. If people have other ideas, I'm happy to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you so much. One of the questions that we were going to pose ties into this a little bit. How can people take a stance without argument or criticism? And so that's kind of what we were speaking to agree to disagree, to be more civil, and to, you know, take a stance without things becoming, you know, too divisive.
My sense is people don't even want to engage for fear of divisiveness. And those who
Right.
don't even have, they don't want to even risk going there. I think that's the challenge.
Right. Speaking to what Patty said, that in a room, people will watch what they say because they don't really want to, you know, create any conflict.
George had his hand up.
Oh, and Eileen also has her hand up.
Eileen, who else has their hand up?
George.
Okay.
I mean, if I'm around,
Yes, George.
you know, Christians, if that issue ever came up, you know, about somebody said about something racist or something, my simple comment to them is, excuse me, aren't we all made in the image and likeness of God? And shut them up right there. Doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter what color you are. And Joe knows I came here from Greece when I was young, okay? But never my father, when I was young in Greece, ever hear him say anything negative about Black people. Okay, we didn't have a lot of Black people. I mean, but we looked up to Black people. You know why? Because Pele was the greatest Black person. You know, for us, it was, you know, because of soccer in Greece and all that. Okay, there was never an issue. And when I came here to this country, 11 years old, I actually went to Ezra Park. And I was one of the few white kids in my class.
What class were you? What graduating class, George?
I graduated in 79
Wow.
from high
Yeah.
school.
It
So I
shifted
came
a
here in
lot by then.
71. So in 71, I first went to Bradley School, okay? And
Okay.
then Bond Street, and then we back into you know, elementary you know, school. But I never, also being one of the few white kids in the school, I never ever felt like anybody being racist, the Black kids that were there against me, you know? We're always like we had a great bond.
Kudos, George.
That's nice. That's a good story to hear.
It
Thank you
is.
so much, George. Eileen had her hand up, and then Regina.
We recently had a large family reunion. Cousins, folks came from all over the country for this reunion, and it was lovely. I love my family. My cousins are great. But in one of the conversations, somehow the conversation got round to talking about fires and Jewish lightning. And I thought I knew what that meant, but it wasn't a term that, you know, so I said, Jewish lightning, you know, it seemed really strange. And they said, oh, you know, arson, you know, the Jews will burn their own buildings so they can get the insurance. And I said, oh, so that's something only Jews do? And, you know, trying to sound ignorant, you know, and there was this uncomfortable silence, and one of my cousins said, well, you know, it's just an expression. But I didn't try to help her out with that. So that took a fair amount of boldness on my part, because when you're all together as family, it's a little hard to stick out and make an uncomfortable conversation. So,
We love your response, your reply,
Wow.
Eileen. That was great.
That was very good, Eileen. Thank you so much for being bold in that instance, especially with family, not always easy. Thank you again. Regina St. Clair.
You're muted,
Regina?
Regina.
You're
Regina?
still muted. Hit your mute button.
Thank you so much. Sorry.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I have three thoughts and all of them could use time, but I just want to mention that I've heard some language skills. I like to call them zingers. There are things that are said that just somehow or other cut through the divisiveness. We've heard 2 or 3 of them tonight, but I think this kind of thinking is a skill that we need to develop, all of us, not to be afraid to find that comment that comes, I think, deep within ourselves that speaks the truth in such a way that people can't say anything back, if you know what I'm saying. I think we've heard a couple of them tonight, and that's a skill I think we need to develop. And the second one is, I think because of churches, Quakers lost a huge number of, I'm a Quaker, lost a huge number of people, and they're now talking about how to help a meeting die, literally, how to put it away. They're talking a lot about that. And membership has gone down in huge amounts. But I think that's the deconstruction that we're going through now, because something new is coming up. And I like to think of it as a new platform, even beyond where we are, where most of us are a little bit older than 50-ish. And that new platform is going to have a different generation under X's and all the way down. And I think that new generation has some very good ideas that I don't hear very often because I'm in this group. I'm in the 80s group. So yeah. And one other thing is the why question, Ellen, kind of, why do they do this? Why is it people, no matter what color, race, or culture, always have to put someone down? Think of high school girls. Oh, that girl, we don't like her because, and so the club joins and that girl's left out for some reason. So there's something innate in human character, I call it a bad seed, that somehow or other we need to find a way to cultivate out, to, weed the seeds out, do the weeding of those seeds, and find ways to plant the seeds that are going to grow us into what we can be. And those seeds are already here. It's just that we're an older generation, and I think we need to be hopeful. That's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Regina. That was very insightful, cultivating more kindness and less meanness in that sense. We have a comment from Reverend Dianne. Everyone please see on Netflix the series entitled Amend, about the 14th Amendment. So for those of you with Netflix, I think that's available and streaming right now.
Also, Claire, earlier on the chat, Claire Garland put a bunch of information about the Quakers and also mentioned how New Jersey voted against the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment and the Emancipation Proclamation. New Jersey was the last state in the Union to outlaw slavery. We have a lot of work to do.
Right, and the Quakers were the first group to provide land to AFAM and indigenous people, African-American and indigenous people in Monmouth County. Corley's made land transactions to her Reverie ancestors in the 1780s. So
I'd like to say,
thank you, Claire. Yes.
I just want to say one thing. Does anyone know that Ben Franklin started one of the first schools with Black children to prove that they were just as smart? This was in Philadelphia, one of his civic accomplishments, which are huge. And he started this school to prove that Black children were just as smart as white kids. And he had actually evidence to prove it. But this is one great American who has left us many things, and I don't think we fully appreciate that. And it was a Quaker school. That's
Thank
nice
you.
to know.
That is nice to know. I did not know that, but thank you for that information, Regina. Thank you.
In fact, along those lines, did you know, I think it was the owners of the Sears and Roebuck Company.
Hmm.
They actually had funded schools across the country for African-American kids.
Really?
In this case, it was at a time, not that they were integrated, but Blacks weren't even being accepted to schools, period. And they didn't really have schools, so they contributed to the funding and built a lot of schools across the country back in the early 1900s. Sears.
Thank you. Lots of respect for that.
Yeah, and I have a comment on what Regina was talking about young folks. I was wondering maybe in the future down the road, this particular group can have like a spinoff or try to, you know, have like something special. Let's talk about race, but have everyone invite another young person to participate
That's
so
great.
that we can hear their thoughts.
Yeah.
Because
That's a good idea.
And
Yes,
of course,
yes.
some of them are going to mirror
Yeah.
their parents, but not all of them. And it'd
We-
be interesting to hear what the differences are and
Yeah.
how they see the future
That's
going.
great.
And maybe we can, and then if they're really off on the deep end, maybe we can provide some background and understanding so that they kind of open up their eyes as well.
It's a great idea.
We
We've
have
had some programs with the young people when we were meeting in person, but we have definitely had a problem with attracting young people to this program. So that's a great idea. And what you said about Sears Roebuck, it just shows that, you know, big business can be good. They
Yeah.
can do things like our government can do things. Businesses can do things that are positive.
Right, churches can do things,
Yeah, but you know,
not just consistent, that's all saying.
absolutely.
Same.
And all of us, like when I was younger, I always liked to listen and learn and observe. And I like harmony. So I wouldn't use my voice in the same way that I've learned to use it as I got older. God knows I'm using it now. But the fact is that you have to use your voice. When you're with your family, it is uncomfortable if you're the oddball out saying things. But if you can't start with your family, then with whom are you going to have these conversations? You have to change things, and it has to start somewhere. No.
Claire, I
true.
think
Yes.
Al James and Christine both have their hands up.
Okay. Yes. Christine?
This wasn't a face-to-face confrontation, but about, I would say 15 years ago or so, my husband's elderly aunt and I had been emailing back and forth for some time. And she used to forward on a lot of emails, some that were humorous, and she forwarded on one that was anti-Muslim. And I had to call her out on it. But she forwarded it to a whole lot of other people besides me. So I replied all. And not only did I reply all to the people she included me with, I went back down the whole chain of all the people. She was like the fifth one forwarding it on. So I must have forwarded it back to 70 people, my reply. And there were several other relatives on my husband's side of the family on that same chain. And I tried to take the high road and say, I'm sure you didn't really read this email thoroughly before you forwarded it, because she was in her 80s at the time. She died at 102. And I said, because, and I said, I have Muslim friends, and if, you wouldn't have said this if you actually took the time to get to know anybody of this faith. And I tried to make a logical example for her as to why you can't just make these blanket statements. And because of responding to that, her daughter-in-law So this would be my husband's cousin's wife, and I got to be really good friends. She replied to me and said, "I'm so glad you said that back to her."
Mhm.
So, but you have to be prepared. And I think
Right.
once you get over 50, you get that thicker skin and you can, you're not as easily
You know, it's so
cowed.
beautiful.
Intimidated.
with
That was
the
a
way
nice
you
bold
worded it.
move. Thank you.
The way you worded it too made a big difference, I believe. That was nice.
Because this is a person, you know, I like his aunt. She was a good person, but she just did not think, she forwarded something that was hurtful to a large segment of the population, and she needed to be aware of it. So
Very good. Thank you, Christine. Mr. James, you have your hand up.
Yes. And what Christine said and what George said, I think, I think speak to the comment I have. She said something, you've got to get to know people. And as George said, when he was, in the group, he was part of the group, what it is. And I think the more that people can interact with each other and get to know each other, especially kids, then you can't teach them, those things. They get to know for themselves. So they have some, background, I guess, against which to judge what they're being taught and so on. So I think the more that we ourselves and especially our kids can interact with each other, with, everybody, Muslims, Jews, what have you, the more that they can do that, the more comfortable they are with other people, and the more that their knowledge tells them that what you're saying is not true, and so on.
Very good.
So,
Thank you so
that's
much.
it.
Yeah, thanks. Patty would like to share something, some information on a program at Brookdale.
Do you want to let Joe make his comment first, and then I can
be quick.
close out with that information?
Okay, Joe,
Yeah.
and then Eileen Tyson has one more, and then I guess that would be it. Yes, go ahead, Joe.
So real quick, if you start practicing, I'll say challenging others and do it in a careful way, you get better at it, you get more comfortable. So I can speak from experience. And the one thing not to do is to be righteous and hit the person with a hammer, because then you're going to get a defensive reaction. So these are all creative ways of trying to say it in a way that the person isn't made defensive, and then maybe they'll listen, and maybe they'll be more careful, at least around you, and that's a step. That's all. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. And Eileen Tyson says that she finally had to write to an uncle to say that while she loved him, she didn't share his views on race and immigration. She asked him to please not include her in the things that had been forwarding, but she said that she would love to receive emails with news about the family.
Beautiful.
So,
Yes.
and then Christine agreed with that as a good tactic, and
Beautiful. Keeping the door open.
keeping the door open, but actually, being bold in your opposition to be, agree to disagree. And I think that's a very good thing. And so I think we are finished for this evening. I will say my thank yous and good evenings to everyone, and I'll turn the program over to Linda and to Patty to close out. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna try to screen share this information I got from Brookdale. Angie Cariotis runs the diversity and inclusion department at Brookdale College. So I'm sure you can just go online and get more information. This is running beginning February 28th.
Yeah.
Standing in solidarity, and you can see they've got a variety of topics. This is all free. Raising consciousness, uprooting oppression in organizations, culture share, racial autobiographies, inclusiveness, health-centered education, etc. So this says down here Tuesdays and Wednesdays, February 28th to March 29th, from 3 to 5 p.m. over at Brookdale. So you can probably go to the Brookdale website
Yeah.
and get details on this, but this looks like, I went to one program a few months ago that Angie ran about having conversations with people you don't agree with. It was meant to be sort of a blue and white, conservative, liberal type of thing. She runs a wonderful program. We can learn a lot from them.
Yeah.
So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, and definitely, please use your voices. We do want to do it in a tactful way, because if you anger somebody, they're not going to listen to you, and you have a lot to share with others. So thanks so much for being with us. Our next program, it's always the last Wednesday of the month. I believe it's the 24th. I had written it down. So I
February
looked at
22nd.
22nd.
Mhm.
And if you need information about what's going on at Brookdale, like Patty said, you can look at their website, and you can also email me. I have information too. Patty, do you have to go to all the sessions?
Oh, no, I'm sure you can just drop
Pick
in
and
on
choose.
whichever one you like. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much to Reverend Dianne, to Ellen, to Kay, who were with us tonight. I hope that you think it was a great conversation. And we'll see you next time. Thanks again for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight. We'll see you next time, hopefully.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.